Chapter 10 Superman's Sister. World War II ended with Japan's unconditional surrender on August 14, 1945. In the United States, the sports world gradually returned to its pre-war schedule, and Babe Didrikson Zaharias finally had her chance to compete for the top women's golf championships. That autumn, Babe won her second Texas Women's Open title. Then she defeated golfer Betty Jamieson in a series of widely publicized challenge matches at Los Angeles and San Antonio. In December, the Associated Press Polo Sports editor voted her Woman Athlete of the Year, the same honor she had received after the 1932 Olympics. "This was the first time I'd been picked since then," she wrote. "During all those years in between, what with my troubles over professionalism and everything, I hadn't been able to compete enough to establish whether I was number one woman athlete." As the 1946 season got underway, Babe told the interviewer, "I want to establish the longest winning streak in history of golf." After saying that, she lost a match when she was edged out of the Western Women's Open in June. But that was the last losing I was going to do for a long time. Beginning with the Trans-Mississippi Women's Amateur in Denver in August 1946, Babe embarked on a string of victories unmatched by any other golfer, male or female, amateur or professional. She entered virtually every major tournament, competing against the world's finest women golfers, and for more than a year, she did not lose a single match. By the end of 1946, she had won 5 consecutive tournaments, including the National Women's Amateur Championship. Once again, the Associated Press voted her Woman Athlete of the Year. In 1947, she continued to pile up victories. Babe was hot. By the middle of the year, she claimed a winning streak of 15 tournaments in a row, a record no golfer had ever approached. "She won everything in sight," said Peggy Kirkbell. Babe was so confident she was hard to compete against. Whenever she played, she attracted large crowds, and even in the heat of competition, she would take time to entertain the galleries with trick shots and wisecracks. When one of her powerful drives sailed out of bounds, she turned to the crowd and explained, "I hit it straight, but it went crooked." When she missed a short putt, she'd say, "I feel like nuts and bolts rattling together. I just love a gallery," she wrote. "It bothers some athletes to have people always crowding around them. I wouldn't feel right if people weren't there, even in a tournament. I like to kid around with the gallery." As summer began, she was ready to take a break. Babe and George had recently moved to Denver, where they bought a beautiful old English-style house, the first house they ever owned. Babe wanted to relax and enjoy her new home. "I was really ready to go home and see my flowers and work around the house and garden," she wrote. But George persuaded her otherwise. He urged her to go over to Scotland and enter the prestigious British Women's Amateur, known officially as the Ladies Amateur Golf Championship Tournament. "You need something like that to top off your winning streak," George said. No American had won the British Women's Amateur since the tournament began in 1893. Babe had a chance to be the first. She couldn't resist. "There was never any event that was more important for me in sports than the British Women's Amateur Golf Championship in 1947, she wrote. The tournament was to be held in June at Julian, Scotland. George had promised to make the trip with Babe, but at the last minute he begged off. His commitments as a sports promoter made it difficult for him to be that far away that long. So Babe went alone. She had never been to Europe before. She sailed across the Atlantic to Southampton, England, then rode the train to London, where she was to catch another train to Scotland's capital city, Edinburgh. By the time she reached the London station, however, the train to Scotland was jammed. Every seat had been taken. Unrecognized, she had to stand in the aisle with her luggage for most of the 10-hour trip. "Whenever anybody left their seat for a few minutes, I'd go sit there until they came back," she wrote. In Edinburgh, a private car was waiting at the station to take her to Julian, the picturesque old village where the tournament was being held. Babe's winning streak had been widely reported in both American and British newspapers, and the people of Julian were curious to meet her. As she walked along the town's cobbled streets in the North Berwick Inn, where she was staying, to the Julian golf course, people would call out greetings and sometimes invite her into their cottages for tea. "Hello, Mrs. Zaharias," they would say, and Babe would reply, "Howdy," in her best Texas twang. She told the reporters, who seemed to follow her everywhere, "I wish you'd ask everybody just to call me Babe," and that's what people started to do. She had arrived several days early so she could familiarize with Julian's windswept seaside golf course, which was inhabited by wandering flocks of sheep that kept the grass cropped. A special courtesy. The course provided Babe with a white-coated attendant who walked along in front of her and scooped up sheep droppings. Local golfers had to manage that task on their own. Across from two of the fairways was a street lined with big old houses. When Babe practiced, people would stand or sit at the windows of those houses watching her. She always waved and they would wave back. One family came over and invited her to dinner. I went there a couple of times and became good friends with them, she wrote. She wasn't prepared for the unpredictable Scottish weather, which turned raw and wet soon after she arrived. She had packed for summer. Post-war rationing was still in effect in Britain, and Babe had no ration coupons to buy warmer clothes. She mentioned her discomfort to reporters. Stories ran in the local papers. Overnight, gifts of warm clothing began to arrive at the North Berwick Inn, and before long, the lobby of the inn was stacking high with bundles. She rummaged through them and picked out a World War II jumpsuit, one of those things the British air raid workers used to wear, a pair of light blue corduroy slacks. From then on, she'd take the jumpsuit and slacks out of the course with her, carrying them in her golf bag. If the weather turned chilly, she put on the jumpsuit. If it got really cold and rainy, she'd slip the slacks over it. Those slacks, or slocks as Scots called them, became known as Babe's Lucky Pants. 99 women entered the tournament. Starting on a Monday morning, pairs of competitors chosen by lot would play two 18-hole matches a day, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, with the loser of each match being eliminated. By Thursday, the two remaining players would compete in a 36-hole final. Babe won her first match easily, but she was puzzled by the silence of the gallery that followed the players around the course. From time to time, she would hear some murmur, "Well played," or "Fine shot." And when she clinched the match on the 12th hole, those watching applauded politely. Obviously, the crowd was much more reserved than American spectators. Babe told Helen Holm, one of the tournament marshals, "I wish these people would just holler and enjoy themselves the way the crowds do back home." Holm explained that the Scottish tradition was for the gallery to be very quiet so as to not disturb the players. That wasn't what Babe was used to, and she wanted to loosen those galleries if she could. During her afternoon match that day, she began to kid around with the crowd, telling them they could make all the noise they wanted. It wouldn't bother her, she promised. It would just make her play better. She won that match on the 16th hole. Then she and her opponent agreed to give the crowd an extra show by playing the two remaining bye holes. While this was a common practice in American tournaments, it wasn't usually done in Scotland, where tradition dictated that play stopped once the winner had been decided. Since Babe was a visiting American, they went ahead. She decided to show off some of her trick shots. On the 17th tee, she slyly placed a kitchen match behind her ball. When she teed off, the match flared up with a loud pop, like a small cannon being fired. The gallery gasped in surprise, then started to laugh. Then she watched in amazement as the ball sailed at least 250 yards and landed in the sand trap just off the green. At the sand trap, Babe pulled out another stunt. She set a second ball on top of one in the sand and swung gently. Ordinarily, the bottom ball would fly onto the green, while the top one jumped into her pocket. This time, as luck would have it, one ball did land in her pocket while the other skipped across the green and dropped right into the hole. By now, the crowd was in an uproar. On the 18th green, Babe made her last shot by turning around, bending over, and putting the ball backwards between her legs into the hole as the crowd broke into cheers and applause. Afterwards, she spent nearly an hour signing autographs. The next day, the tournament officials posted a sign on the clubhouse bulletin board reading, "Please do not play the bye holes." "So I didn't do that anymore," Babe wrote. But those crowds got bigger and friendlier every day. They sounded almost like the crowds at home by the end of the tournament. The British had never seen anyone like her. By the time she reached the semifinals, her gallery had grown to an enthusiastic crowd of some 8,000 people. In that match, she faced Jean Donald, the Scottish champion and the woman considered most likely to defeat Babe. Everyone expected a close contest, but Babe was in top form that afternoon. "She must be Superman's sister," a spectator exclaimed, after Babe had whacked one of her powerful drives. She won the semifinal match by a lopsided score, 7-up with 5 holes to go. In the final, a 36-hole match, Babe faced British golfer Jacqueline Gordon. The weather that morning was warm and sunny for a change. Babe put on a light sweater and skirt and left her jumpsuit and blue corduroys behind. Midway through the first 18-hole round, however, the weather turned windy and chilly. Babe began to shiver. "Pretty soon I was wishing for my cold weather stuff," she wrote. I didn't burn up the course during that morning round the way I had particularly all my other matches. At the end of the morning round, the match stood even. As the golfers broke for lunch, people in the gallery called out, "Babe, go get your slocks on. Go get your slocks on." When she returned for the afternoon round, she was dressed more warmly in her jumpsuit and blue corduroys, her lucky pants. They must have been exactly that. Babe broke the tie on the first hole and stayed ahead of Jacqueline Gordon for the rest of the match. She captured the British Women's Amateur Championship on 32nd hole, 5 up with 4 holes to play. The gallery broke into applause that lasted for 15 minutes, according to Babe. She was elated. When photographers asked her to go around to the front of the clubhouse for pictures, she broke into a sprint, hurdled a brick wall, and danced a Highland fling. Surely no woman golfer has accomplished in the championship what Mrs. Zaharias has achieved in this one. Declared the Manchester Guardian, a leading British newspaper, she has never had to go beyond the 16th green, and she has lost only 4 holes in 6 rounds. She is a crushing and heartbreaking opponent. Before heading home, Babe spent a few days playing some Scotland's legendary golf courses, including historic St. Andrews. Her high spirits and spectacular golf game had endeared her to sports fans all over Britain, and when her train left Edinburgh for London, the station platform was crowded with hundreds of admirers singing Auld Lang Syne. This time, Babe had a reserved seat on the train. She sailed back to New York on the Queen Elizabeth. As the great liner approached New York City, a tugboat jam with reporters, photographers, and newsreel cameramen came out to meet the ship and greet the first American woman to win the British Women's Amateur Championship. George was standing up front, gripping the tugboat's rail, and when Babe spotted him, she waved and hollered. Then she put 2 fingers in her mouth and whistled. At that moment, the whistle on the Queen Elizabeth let out a loud blast. Later, George told Babe, "Honey, I could hear your whistle above the Queen Elizabeth's." Babe and George spent several days in New York celebrating her victory and giving interviews. Then they flew to Denver, their new home, where a festive parade and reception awaited them. The parade featured gaily decorated floats, each one representing one of the sports Babe had played: basketball, baseball, javelin throwing, hurdling, and the rest. Babe rode on the last float, surrounded by roses and waving to the crowds as the airplane above spelled out, "Hi, Babe," in skywriting. At City Hall, she was greeted by the governor of Colorado and the mayor of Denver, who presented her with a giant key to the city while 50,000 onlookers roared their approval. The key was more than twice as tall as George and weighed 250 pounds. However, George by this time weighed even more, and while he didn't have to carry the key home, he did show the crowd that he could lift it off the ground.